Today I'm submitting my entry for the Golden Spike Award from the NMRA. It is based on my E&NFRR layout, and that stands for Eileen and Norman Fisher Railroad, and it is named after my mother and my aunt who essentially bankrolled it. It is N scale. It was built on a 30 by 80 hollow core door, which amounts to about 16 and change square feet. It has 5 scenes. It has a historic town, a downtown, a suburb, a main industry, and a park and land area. The two main physical structures are a mountain and a tunnel. Their base is foam and sculpted. Ground foam and trees were used throughout the layout from woodland scenics, with the exception of some ground foam that was homemade from pillow foam, acrylic paint, water, and a blender. Some of the ground foam also was used to create rocks and talus. Also, I used sawdust in a scene in the downtown park for the cemetery. For rolling stock, I have many pieces of rolling stock, a lot which I don't actually use. I have some with microtrains couplers, but most have the Rapido type couplers. So I did get into the weathering piece of it, just started with it. I have 2 cars that I've weathered, and mainly what I did was I used a gloss coat, picked up some chalks from a local art store. I used some washes over the cars as well. For detailing cars, multiple cars I did replace Rapido couplers with microtrains couplers. So I did have to create a conversion car if I wanted to use some of the cars that still had the Rapido couplers on them, which I did with this Cargill tank car. I just recently received an airbrush and started to learn to paint and detail. I'm currently painting and detailing an N-scale engine shell, also a boxcar. It's very non-traditional. I used the black paint on it and some gold striping. I'm also working on decals for that. Then I wanted to point out another piece of rolling stock, the first kit I ever built. An HO scale kit from AccuRail. It was a Grand Trunk Western boxcar that I'm using on a separate HO scale layout. For the structures and scenery, we start with the kit building. That was the first thing I did. 3 buildings came in a kit, which were all very old style buildings. It had a newspaper, a hotel, and a fire station. And so what I did with those is I actually created a historic section separate from the downtown and the other areas. I also built the main industry building on the layout adjacent to an engine facility that I built. The main industry is a confectioner, as I am a chocolate lover. I built that up from a kit. The first building I ever detailed, though, we go back to the newspaper building in that original box of 3 buildings. It just didn't feel real with the plastic, and it didn't show the brick very well in N scale. So I searched around for technique. So what I came up with was using this little package of nail hole filler. That really did a nice job at the time building that up. 10 years on, I can do a lot better than I did there, but that was the first detailing I ever did on a building kit. Then several other buildings through the downtown and throughout, in the station and the old fire station and the engine building, all have signs. I had some paper or cardboard type signs, experimenting with thin paper and weathering it on as well. So there are some additional details added to the building kits. The roads throughout, except for the dirt road, were made from Woodland Scenics Smooth It and painted with an asphalt top coat from Woodland Scenics. The suburban sidewalk was also made with Smooth It, with scoring in it using a hobby knife. Downtown sidewalks and building base was made from a soft foam. I saw a technique on how you could score them to not only have sidewalk, but also cracks and things like that. So that really intrigued me, and so I did that. I also was not happy with how the Woodland Scenic Smooth It turned out for the base and sidewalks. So this gave me another opportunity to experiment, and I'm happy with how those turned out. Moving on to scratch building and kit bashing, I have a number of pieces that I would consider probably scratch built. So we have this parking lot that I built. The base of it was Woodland Scenic Smooth It with a mix of acrylic paints for the top coat. The spaces were made using highways and byways striping, and the parking barriers were from Osborne models. And then finally, the barrier to the road and the sidewalk there was made from scrap wood that I had, and I just painted. A couple of landforms that I actually made were the mountain. That was made from insulation foam and Sculptamold, Woodland Scenics pigments for the coloring, ground foam, and trees to fill out the rest of the landscaping part of the scene. The rock and culvert near to the suburban area was a second attempt at water. I had a first attempt at water that didn't go very well, but I came back years later a little bit more informed, a little bit more daring. So I built the rock structure out of insulation foam culvert and also used Woodland Scenics talus to act as a barrier and an interruption in the flow of the water. For the water, I used Envirotex Light. I had gotten 2 different packages of power poles to put on the layout. I just said, I'm going to try it. I had a bunch of thread, so I picked a dark blue sewing thread that just showed up on pictures, and it lit differently than black thread. So I used the dark blue, and it looks black like power lines. I just super glued the power lines to the power poles. I wanted to make it a little bit more realistic, so I put meter boxes on the different buildings, added a strip that goes up high to take the wires on, and it would go down to the meter boxes. Those were both made with strip styrene. Then the station is one building. I have Amtrak passenger cars, and the original Santa Fe car set I got, those carriages were so long that one carriage was longer than just that station. And it also didn't work as a downtown station for me. So I had that soft foam left over, and I scored it to have the same square structure as was on the base of the plastic kit. For the fencing, I took the fencing from a Cato Bank structure, which is actually on the layout as the school in the suburb. I didn't use the base there for it, so I took the fencing from that and created the fencing around the station, and then added a sign to that. Once I got the platforms in place, I needed an edge to come up and be square with the railroad tracks, so I used strip styrene for that as well. And then one of the buildings I really stretched my skills at the time, was the Trackside 2 business structure. It was made from the DPM modular walls kit. I made a roof from styrene sheet and styrene strips and painted that black to darken it for lighting and the sort of thing. For the back end of the building, the front end has the entrances and signs for the businesses. The back end, though, that's right up against the railway, I took that as they're just no longer rail served businesses in there. So that back is boarded up. They don't have doors and windows anymore back there, with it right up against the train tracks. So I used some scrap wood that I had lying around, put it in a little bit willy-nilly to have some openings to it and make it look like it was just shabbily boarded up. Then I started weathering with chalk, and so I used chalk on the building to simulate the water damage and the water pour from the rain. And those signs were part of a kit of paper products that I got. Then we have the fertilizer dealer. The fertilizer dealer structure was the Quonset. I didn't really have a place in my layout. Originally, it was going to go in an area that ended up being the suburb. I had gotten a bunch of animals, and amongst them cows. So I came up with the idea of having a fertilizer out in the country and have kind of a farming type scene. So initially I was trying to do farming with tilled soil, and so you had the bumps in there and everything. But then I converted it over to this fertilizer dealer, and the dirt and grass that was used are all Woodland Scenics. One of the early scratch builds for me was the fencing. The fencing was made from toothpicks and wood glue. That's how I created the fertilizer dealer. Now we come up on the tunnel, and the tunnel I'm really proud of. This was one of those things where I learned it from a YouTube video. I was successful on the first try, and so I'm really impressed with myself. What we have here is I ended up having the Woodland Scenics portals. The floor of the tunnel was made of cork since it already had road bed. From there, I used foam core to create the tunnels. It was 3/8-inch foam core. You sort of bend it and crumple it, and that kind of creates the rock formations, and it help me get it around the curve. So it served two purposes, and I did a little bit of dry brushing to make it look more rock formy in there. And then I thought about it, and I said, well, it's on a curve. It just gets in the largest car. Just gets in and doesn't touch the portals, and it's all good. But what happens if something's off kilter a little bit? How am I going to get stuff out of there? So I decided not to scenic the back of it since it was already on the end of the layout. I just cut 3 cuts in to create the door, and I had this rubber washer, and I just cut it in 2, glued them on as handles, and it works really, really well because I've had intermodal loads have come off in there. So I've had to go get those once in a while. But that was one of my proudest scratch builds. Fisher Park I did highlight here towards the end. I wanted to do some kind of park to honor my grandfather who was in the military. I also wanted to, do the lighting. I had the trees. I had the path to use from what I was going to use for the streets for the old town. So I created Fisher Park. It has a couple of hotels or lodges. It's on the kind of the back end of the historic church with a cemetery. Hamburger joints just on the other side. It's got a nice tree and nice lighting. The cobblestone path comes from Chooch Enterprises. The streets go from paved to gravel to get into the park. I added the tank to honor my grandfather there. The civil and electrical or track features. The additional electrical element that I use on my layout is lighting. I have 2 street lamps. One is behind the train station and one is in Fisher Park. And then I have several buildings that I had wired for lighting. And I used stick-on lights that I got at an art store near me. They had them on clearance on the wall, so I grabbed them. They're incandescent bulbs. I just used an Atlas power supply that I've had for a number of years. When we look at the track, I got frustrated with time it was taking to get myself going and get the track working. And previous layout that I started, I struggled with the track. When I got into this one with the Cato track, it was very easy to put together and electrically set up. I just wanted to kind of get going, and I was impatient, and so I ended up with an oval. I did just a single spur using a turnout. I did this passing siding on it as well. So I just felt like I needed another feature for this, even though I had crossings. I took the old Atlas N scale track that I had so much trouble with in the past, and the couple of Atlas turnouts that still work. So I just set up a crossover so that we have a functional feature. I wired it for DC, an old Model Power DC controller power pack. I ballasted it with Woodland Scenics fine ballast, alcohol applied with 50/50 white glue and water, and a drop of dish soap to get it operational. You'll notice that I did have some difficulty. I found out one of the frustrating things with the Atlas track or the turnouts. It doesn't matter which car goes over it. The base of the frogs is too high. The wheel flanges are trying to go lower, and so it's popping them up. Still got it operational. I have 2 crossings on the layout. Just off of the suburban area, you have the tenement building and the kind of lower class house. That has all gravel. So I have gravel going up to the track, and then I have a wood crossing that I use from Woodland Scenic. A short way from there, the main suburban road goes past the tracks. So it has to go over the tracks. For that, I use Woodland Scenic Smooth It and acrylic paint. You'll see in the operational piece of it, the trains are getting across those crossings. And then we have the siding. The siding was built for Tri-Town, which is the downtown station. I used left and right Cato turnouts for that and ballasted it. Originally with medium ballast, but changed over to fine ballast. I had some operational issues. The medium ballast was too big. I don't know where I got the idea to use medium ballast, but I had to change that over. and it actually damaged one of my engines. One of the pieces of ballast got into the gears of the truck. I learned my lesson with that one, but we got the siding in there. The layout is DCC. Cato Track is in an oval that serves the Tempton station. That's the suburb. Tri-Town Downtown Station has the one siding, has the spur serving Danco Confectioners. And then there's a separate local track in the middle between Danco and Tri-Town, which is actually DC. Appreciate any feedback and hope that this fulfills the requirements for the Golden Spike Award.